Business is messy and unpredictable.
Sometimes lonely.
So lonely.
So lonely.
And inspiration can often come from really weird places.
We pick up where the bullet point blogs and the highlight reels leave off.
We start with the stories. Welcome back to So Here's My Story. I'm Jodi.
I'm Eliot.
And we are post-Thanksgiving, pre-Christmas season.
We are, although according to all the stores in my area, pre-Christmas was somewhere around October 1st.
Well, so things at our house are far more regimented than that because we have the whole pre-Thanksgiving, which just the way we do things does not involve any Christmas. But then we also have another period between like after Thanksgiving where we cannot begin the Christmas things yet, as per my daughter's edict, because her birthday is November 30th.
Ah, okay. So you have an intervening event.
Yes. And she absolutely goes bonkers if we do anything Christmas, even like a Christmas song before her birthday. She goes, nope, between now and November 30th is just my birthday.
No, and I get that. Kudos to her. Right. I'm glad she has her priorities.
So we have only recently slid into the Christmas holidays. So now we can start that. But speaking of it, but I haven't seen you since before Thanksgiving.
That's
so how
right.
was your Thanksgiving?
It was great. See, we don't do, as you know, we don't do a traditional Thanksgiving. My family is scattered with Nikki's family in Oregon. So
Scattered geographically
and emotionally, sometimes mentally.
Right.
So we had a traditional Thanksgiving on the Sunday before for my mom because I was going to see her. And then we went up to New York and we saw a Broadway show as we've done for the past 4 or 5 years or something. And then we had a traditional Thanksgiving of ramen.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah, it was great.
Perfect. Well, it's funny because I was actually thinking back to one of our early podcasts this week because early on, it was in July, I remember. It was I think the episode was called Christmas in July.
Oh, right.
We talked about that tension between tradition and the novelty that makes things special. I mean, tradition makes things special too, but sometimes traditions get older or they just become more intense or stressful. So we actually, for the first year ever, stayed here in Baltimore for Thanksgiving. For 25 years, I've been driving home every Thanksgiving and Christmas.
Home being West Virginia, because I still, at the ripe old age of 44, have 3 grandparents living. Wow. So every year I'm like, we got to go home because this, Sure.
This might be their last year. And every year it's all the more possible that it's their last. But for several reasons, we decided to stay here. And I thought about the podcast a lot because in some ways it was hard. I know my grandmother was disappointed, both my grandmothers. So that was tough. But in a lot of ways it was we had some new traditions. And I don't know how many of them will become traditions, but it was just a thought I played. I almost went back and listened to the old episode to see if I had new wisdom to add in.
but no, and that's really cool. And it just reminded me because we've had conversations over the intervening years, and it's always funny to me, kind of the almost embarrassed conversation when somebody in my family would go, I don't actually like turkey. Yeah. And they say it with this, like you're admitting that you hate the flag and the military, thing.
Yeah.
But they're, it's hard to break away from what's supposed to be, what you're supposed to do.
Yeah. No, we may want to wrap back and do a whole other episode of that again, now that I have some new insights, but not today. So let's take a minute and thank our sponsors. And then I have a story. Usually we sort of vie for it, but I'm claiming today.
Okay. You got today. But first, as you said, let's thank our sponsors on Patreon, Tom Loveland and Mind Over Machines, Cat's Copy, Herbert and Ethel Inc., the architecture firm of GWWO, and Mary Craft Staffing and HR Solutions. And
I will say, because we have still not updated the Patreon levels.
No, we haven't.
But that is truly going to happen in the next week or so. So one last chance, if we are sending out if you've seen the picture, we're sending out So Here's My Story whiskey tumbler glass, which is so fun, to all of our patrons. It's actually only going to be at a patron level of one of our higher patronages. But we are going to send that out just as a thank you to our early adopters, to all current patrons, even if you're just at the $1 or $2 level. So if you want to hop on in and get a glass, do so now quickly, because that is going to be changing very soon. As soon as we get the boxes so we can ship them out.
Yeah. And we actually only got an initial order of a small number of them.
Yeah.
So.
No, and that's not like fake scarcity.
No, it's not like
get yours now.
Yeah.
All right. Let's get started.
You have a story.
I do.
Okay, let's go.
So here's my story. It's actually two stories, two very short stories. Both of them kind of embarrassing for me, just because they'll make me sound really scattered. But I think that this is so relevant. We all do these things in large and small ways in our lives and in our businesses. So I first jotted this down as a topic that I wanted to do probably a month or so ago, because I caught myself doing something really funny, which I'll tell you about in a second. But then it happened again yesterday, a totally different situation, but I'll share both of them. So I flagged it. I was like, okay, we have to do this episode because this is really important. So I, here we go. So I one of the things I do is I host a roundtable.
Right.
And I host several of them for entrepreneurs and business owners. And there was something, I don't print a lot for them because I try to keep things somewhat electronic when possible, but there was something that I wanted us to go over as a group and everyone to kind of look through and process and think about. And I had sent it out to them, but I also know that hardly anybody has any time to look at things in advance. And knowing that, I wanted to have it in front of us. So it was kind of longer. So I worked really hard to get it down onto 2 pages so that I could print it front and back. And I printed it on my inkjet printer, which is, not the greatest thing in the world. And I had like 12 copies or whatever. So not sure what I was thinking there, because the day beforehand, I remembered that this particular group, often does meet in person, but this particular month we were meeting via Zoom. So we were doing it as like a virtual meeting.
So you held it up to the screen.
Yeah. So I did not have it in front of them, but to fall back on my original intent, I still really felt it was important that we had a copy in front of us.
Okay.
So I was like, all right, I need to, I want to make sure that I get this in front of them. Oh, and that was the other thing. I had highlighted parts of it. That was the big distinction. I had sent them a link to the original article, but then once I had, before I printed it out, I had highlighted parts that felt really distinct. And that was the visual that I wanted, because it was a lot of information. And I just wanted us to hit on these like 3 or 4 things and pull them out. Sure. So the visual felt important. So, and just the internet link doesn't do that. So I then went through this process of scanning the printed inkjet page, which is double-sided, and the scanner that I have is just such a pain in the neck, and it's not easy to use. And when it scans inkjet things, it sort of scans the back and the front like you can see the other side through. It was a terrible scan. I was trying to clean it up. I spent, not an inordinate amount of time on this, but I spent probably 20 minutes, 25 minutes getting like a clean scan that I could email it to them. At which point I remembered that that the thing I'd printed on my inkjet printer was a Word document that I had highlighted the Word document.
Yeah.
So I scanned this thing to create a PDF when I already had it as a PDF that was not, hence the embarrassment of this story. Like, it was really kind of an idiot thing that I could have gotten to this process way faster, but I just didn't take the time to think it through. And I'm hoping that the moral of these stories is not just like, Jodi's an idiot.
Get Jodi a new scanner at Patreon level.
or maybe Jodi should sleep more because she's not thinking things through. I'm actually very good at thinking things through, just not my own things, apparently. So here's another thing that happened, though. So I have this wonderful new person who just joined my team who is helping me. It's been beyond time that I had an additional person on the team to help with the clients that I'm working with right now. And so she started on Monday, and because I have been a little overloaded, the things have been stacking up. And, when the overwhelm comes, then things stack up even more because you're overwhelmed, So again, with the embarrassment of like, the first process is we have to go through the stacks of stuff that have caught up and whatever. And so I'm like, I love that her first impression of me is like, here's all my chaos, So in going through some things, she was going through some older files as well that I'd left her, and she found a check that I had somehow missed in an envelope that was like between 2 other things or something from quite a while ago. And by quite a while ago, I mean 2015.
Nice. Yeah.
Wasn't a huge check, but all the more reason that if it was me, I might just be like, oops, my bad. I'll take the hit on that because I'm not going to call, I'm not going to try to get another check. And she said, well, do you want me to just go ahead and try and deposit it? And I was like, no. Because, and to sort of jump to the punchline of what I want to discuss, as you can imagine, it's embarrassing. Like, so my brain sort of I don't know if I would call it shame. That's a bit of a strong word, but the embarrassment, the shame, the like this is my bad kind of swooped in. So in my mind, before I would even talk to them about it, I was going to go back through my records, make sure they hadn't, because I don't remember back then, maybe they sent me an additional check the next month. Like maybe they already made good on it. So I turned it, and I don't even know how to tell her to go look that up. So in my brain, I turned this into before we can do anything about that, I'd have to go look this up. I'd have to do this. Just set that aside and I'll get back to it later. And she just sort of looks at me and she goes, or I could just call them. I was like, okay. Yeah, that could work too. Like that, sure, go ahead, call them. And so she like whips out her cell phone. She calls them. They're like, oh, no problem. We'll send you another one now. That one's old, blah, blah, blah. Check's on the way to me. Done. Like zero issues, zero whatever. And they're tiny stories. They're not, they're pretty inconsequential in the bigger scheme of the world. But I'm so conscious of how easily and then I could tell you 10 more stories from the 2 days that she's been here of things that in my own mind, because I know all the details and all the pieces and all the nuances, I can overcomplicate them. But when you have, sometimes it takes someone else looking for like watching you parallel park your car kind of thing. I think there are other ways to get there, but I would just love to talk about this trap. And I can hear myself sort of swirling because I'm hoping your answer is your answer is not, that's just you, Jodi.
No, but I really do believe that there should be something called file shaming. I think there has to be file shaming. So okay. If I'm like, you had a check from 2015 and you're like, Eliot, that's just file shaming.
Oh, I get it. Don't you file shame me.
Don't file shame. Yeah. But no, I think that's true. What strikes me is, because this happened to me as well when we brought on somebody new and I was explaining certain procedures. We kind of gang oriented her. We all explained various procedures. Oh. And when she said, well, why don't you do it this way? I can't remember what we were talking about, but there was one thing she said, well, okay, but I get what you're saying. I can follow the steps. So why don't you do it this way? And there was this collective pause. We were just staring at her. And my initial impulse was going, well, because that'll never work. Because
we have a good reason and we super thought it through. And I don't really have to tell you all about that.
Right. We super thought it through. But you're right. A lot of times.
Because we didn't think about that.
Because we didn't think that instead of making 3 rights, we could have made a left.
Yeah.
And that would have been easier.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it's I thought it was worth a sort of telling on myself these like ridiculous, inane kind of falling down sillinesses. But why do you think it is? I'm torn on whether I want to think of this at like the individual level. It's so much easier to talk about it in a pointing fingers them kind of way if we think of it as an organizational level. But yeah, organizations, anything you start doing then becomes like, well, that's that thing we always do. We take tab B, we stick in slot A. It's always been done that way. That could be a whole episode in and of itself, but maybe that's what this episode.
It could be, but look, as a lawyer, I see this all the time, and I see it, and I go back to this a lot, but I see this in contracts because you have businesses that don't even understand what's on the page, but they've always done it that way. And so it's hard to change. But I think one of the things with processes, it kind of reminds me that if you ever are giving a talk, you're actually going to give a speech. And so you write it out. And you can write it out and it looks good on the page and you deal with all the different things that you want to deal with and how you want to phrase it. But if you take the time to read it out loud and actually hear yourself, you realize, well, that's not how people talk. That doesn't make sense. That's not how, it doesn't sound right, even though it looks right on the page. And I think even the simplest processes for companies, a lot of times they look right on the page. But if you take the time to read it out loud or explain it to somebody, you realize where that give and take, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah. And so here's my curiosity in this. Because let's just, I could hear the argument that maybe this isn't true, but just for the sake of getting to the nugget that I want to get to here, let's just assume, and I think it's somewhat safe to assume, that when any bit of a process or a step or a thing gets put into place, it's because it was trying to solve a problem. Like there was a purpose. Somebody was thinking about something and said like, oh, you know what? We never, this always gets messed up with FedEx. And so let's have a little outgoing. This is how I imagine, back in the day of fax cover sheets, like we had a fax cover sheet at one of my offices where there were a bunch of check boxes to save you the trouble. Somebody thought they're like, oh, this is a thing that doesn't always get done. So here, let's make this checklist. Let's do this thing. So my curiosity is like, what happens? Like, when is the moment where we stop trying to make things better? Like, where do we just sort of like deal with the rock? And I have a suspicion it has to do with level of discomfort or level of like how big the rock is in your shoe, because there's some sort of instigating instance that makes you start the thing. And then it can continue to be bothersome and a pain, but then you keep doing it.
Yeah, I mean, it
like,
does.
Why doesn't somebody go, well, this could be better? Like with your instance, like did no one else think like, well, this is probably, maybe it just wasn't a bother the way you were doing it?
No, it was, but it wasn't, it just didn't rise to the level. I think two things have to happen. It not only has to be a rock in your shoe, but it has to be a rock in your shoe at the exact time when you're in a position to take off your shoe.
That's an interesting.
So I'll give you an example. We have a procedure for opening up a new file. And it's a fillable PDF. We fill in all the information.
By file, you like? Do you mean a
new matter in our office?
Oh, okay. Not like a file folder.
Oh, I'm sorry. No.
I was like, that's a lot of pomp and circumstance.
Yes. We cut the ribbon. We open it up. A group of us gathers as the manila spreads across the desk.
That's my manila folder opening sound.
Yes, it's very nice.
Even though they don't do that.
So no, it's for opening up a new matter in our office, because there are certain procedures. You have to have the client contact information and do conflict checks and all that. But anyway, so there's a fillable PDF, and the attorney who gets the client in fills it out and hits submit. Now, when you hit submit, it automatically populates an email that goes out to the people who have to add the information for the client on various systems. One of the people on the email no longer works here and hasn't worked here for quite a while. So what happens is the email populates and it has like 3 or 4 names on it.
Right.
And each time we have to put the cursor up and just cross her out, just backspace over her name. It takes 2 seconds. And each time I do that, I was like, oh yeah, that's got to change. But I don't have time to do it right then. But it's gone on for, I don't know, a year. We just haven't changed it. It makes no sense.
See, but so that's funny. So then there's probably one more level to it. It's like rocking your shoe, a point when you can take your shoe off, and then just what kind of human you are. Like my patience level for redundancy is so low, but it's probably why I did well in operations and whatnot, because I get irritated by redundancy or have, like, that would drive me crazy. I would find a way to make time to go in and delete her name. In fact, when we're done recording, I may go delete her name in your system. Just FYI.
Have at it. I mean, that's and if you did that, everybody in the organization would be go, oh, thank God, that was finally done.
Well, actually, it's interesting. I was sort of like cracking those jokes, but maybe that is a piece to it. You need someone in your company, in your department, in your world, in your life, somewhere that has a low tolerance for rocks in shoes. Yeah. And someone to whom it feels worth it, even in the small moment, like small irritants they dislike. And the reason I think that's kind of an insightful, it's hysterical. The reason I think I'm super insightful in this moment.
Do tell.
The reason I think that that's important is that I know for a fact that those people are not always, it's not that they're not always welcome. It's that the person who's like, oh, let's change this thing, isn't always met with the openest of arms and the greatest confetti. Like they can be an irritant if they're always wanting to fix things and make them better.
Well, they can be, there are 2 things. One is you can certainly be an irritant if you only view your job as solely pointing out the things that are wrong.
Right.
Okay. So if that's it, if you're just pointing out that, well, why is this has to, somebody ought to do something about that.
Right.
That's the irritant. If you're the one
speak
that's
in third person about it. Yeah.
If you say, hey, after we're done recording, I'm just going to fix this.
Right. But here's the fascinating thing to me, and maybe it is the value, maybe this is one more place where we're looking at the value of a third person, an objective party, somebody else to be kind of watching what you're up to. I was that person in my organization. I am somebody who thinks that way and will go and do the thing to make it work more smoothly. And I started off this episode telling you about 2 places where I was going, way, way, way around the bend. And there was a much, much, much easier way to do it. And it literally, in neither case, it's not like I saw that opportunity and decided to step over it. It was a complete blind spot. Like, so I wonder, I wonder about why what causes these irritants to kind of become blind in the blind spot zone. And I think sometimes an easy answer is we're just running around. In that moment with the PDF, my first story, I was under the gun because it was happening soon. I didn't have a lot of time to deal with it, so I didn't pause.
Right.
And I think that's one sort of thought I'm having as we explore this topic is the value of the pause. We've talked before in a couple episodes about sort of like the pit stop from an emotional hygiene kind of way. But I think even from a hit the pause button, get clear on what's important. Is there a better way to do this? There's some value there. And I think in my second example with the check that we found is the role of the emotional piece, clouded by my mind automatically went to all the things that I would want to do to check first before I called them, because the only thing worse than calling them and saying, I found this check from 2015 was if they said to me, yeah, and we sent that the next month, like a double payment, and you didn't notice that either. Cause then, then I'm like, oh my God, now I look doubly stupid. Whereas Amy didn't have any of that baggage or concern. She was just able to quickly say, oh, I'll just call them. And
well, but I don't think that's exactly a fair comparison, because you may be thinking, a person in that situation could be thinking, well, geez, if I call them, then what is that going to do to their impression of me? Are they going to think I'm inefficient? They're going to think that I'm disorganized. They entrust me with this. And is my reputation in a small way going to take a hit? Now, of course, Amy didn't have any issues with that. She was solely looking at solving this problem and not looking at a 10,000-foot view of, yeah, but what if the client, she's just saying, hey, I need this to be made right.
Well, now this actually goes back to a conversation you and I were having earlier this morning about the nuances of like, if this, then that. What sort of drives home that emotional component even more is just that. If this had been a check from one of my clients for my business, her saying, I'll just call them, I would have said, no. I want to make sure this is all great. This is an organization that I do some volunteer work for, and I'm a treasurer for, and still a high level of embarrassment because I take that responsibility very seriously. Sure. I don't toss around their checks right. randomly. Right. Every organization that I'm on now is like, oh my God, get her off that. So I still, there was a high level of concern and embarrassment for me about it. But there was a slight step away of, I won't say anonymity, but she could call and say like, hey, I'm working with this organization and we found this thing. Can we go ahead? It created a little bit of a third party. So I think what I'm hearing in that is the closer it feels like something that would reflect on us personally, the more likely we are to sort of fall in a blind spot swirl of it. Yeah.
And I think that separation is incredibly important, and not just for embarrassment purposes. There's just another thing is I don't tend to make collection calls to my clients. My clients generally right. pay on time, but if there's a late payment, and fine, everybody pays late every once in a while. But if it gets to be past a certain point, I still, because I'm working with them, I don't want to create this adversarial or tension. And so there's somebody in my organization that will call up, and there's a deniability. Hey, I'm just looking at this, and basically an unspoken, Eliot doesn't even know I'm making this call, but I was looking at our records and we're coming to so you do have that buffer zone. And I think it's incredibly valuable if the person in charge of maintaining the relationship is not the one that has to deal with a lot of the administrative and the difficult things. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that I'm reminded of when you were talking about that person who is sensitive to the rocks in the shoes, the quote that came to mind is Ernest Hemingway. And what he was talking about is strength in the broken places. And I think that every organization needs somebody who exhibits strength in the broken places, who can find those. And even if it's a small rock, even if it's a little, like that email address on the populated field, even if it's a small rock, if you have somebody whose strength is to hone in on fix the broken places, it's amazing what that does for your organization. Yeah, no, and it's funny, and I don't think I think training someone
in your organization is such a great way to uncover, because there were more than one things that, as I was trying to explain to someone, like as you explain it and you try to introduce them to something and you have to go through those steps, and you're like, if you have that sense of, gosh, it's embarrassing that I have to do these like 5 steps that probably aren't really necessary, but no one's cleaning them up. I think it's a great way to pull out that, what's the word? Not microscope, magnifying glass, the magnifying glass, to look at where are there probably some things that are, could be easier. Because I think efficiency, efficiency certainly has value for the face value, to be redundant. There's value in the face value of efficiency of like, we could get more done. But it's so interesting that, and I just sent a quick note to Amy, this one who started this morning, about this actually, that in the 2 short days that she's been with me, we cleaned up, we got so much clutter off the things that were just kind of weighing on me. And not only does that feel better, obviously, and just getting these things caught up and made simpler, but what I noticed so distinctly this morning was that having things be simpler and having some ways that she and I have already developed, that instead of me trying to write something up, I'm just going to like record an audio message and email it to her. That's going to be so much easier for me because I don't have to sit and take the time to do it. What I noticed is that efficiency doesn't just buy me efficiency or productivity. Efficiency buys me brain space that allows me then to, I got up this morning and I could see so much more clearly, and I could strategize and prioritize and say, you know what, those 3 things can wait till later. I'm going to quickly do these 2 things. And I just had this like, I don't even want to say laser focus. It's just that I could actually now create less overwhelm going forward. So it wasn't just that it caught me up. I don't know. Is this making any sense?
Yeah, it's like, I think what you're describing is mental feng shui.
Yes, that's exactly how it felt. It was, I don't even know enough about, I don't know enough to even continue the metaphor, but it just felt like the things I was doing today would keep me from creating more overwhelm in this next week or 2, because I had the space to move and think. And so interesting. Yeah,
I think that the right people and the right procedures, there's the reason I said mental feng shui is because it reminds me of, instead of focusing on tasks, you're focusing on pathways and harmony. And I think there's something to be said for that, even in something as mundane as
that's interesting.
Office procedure.
Yeah.
Because in mental space, I think pathways and harmony is everything.
Yeah. So one last thought on that. I knew there was something something underneath of this conversation that made me want to bring it up. And I think you just hit on it, is that
it only took me 27 minutes, by the way.
Perfect. But that seems to be about how long it takes us to be like, here's the point. Okay, we got to a point. So processes and procedures have such, like even saying those words, I'm like, processes and procedures, it has such a mundane, if there's an art and science to business, it is solidly on the left brain, science, blobbity Excel spreadsheet side of the world, right?
Yes.
Although I have to say, Excel spreadsheets make me very happy. So
I know they do.
But that's a whole other episode. They can feel so mundane, and they can feel almost, like something bogged downish, but there is something really magic about what they can unlock, I think. I'm not trying to like overblow the relevance of that, but that there is more to what a really great, well-honed, culled down to just what's necessary process can do for an organization than just simply make sure all the T's get crossed and the I's get dotted. It can actually free up your really smart people to be acting in your company as really smart people, instead of running around spending their time doing things spending their time scanning things that they already have as a PDF, right?
Yeah.
So,
that's exactly right. It's a path. So that's our story.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We're so grateful for everyone who's listening in, and we're especially grateful to all of our patrons who've joined us over at patreon.com to support our efforts here. And we hope to see you next week.
And listen, having told our story, we'd love to hear yours.
Ooh, yeah.
So I guess what we're trying to say is, the floor is yours. go to sohere'smystory.com and join the conversation.
Wait, before you go, there are 3 things that we really want you to know.
First, you can find show notes and links to all of the random things we happen to mention during the episode by visiting our website, sohere'smystory.com.
The second thing is we like to talk.
And not just to each other.
That's right. So what we really want to hear is your story. So while you're there, you'll also find links to connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and other ways to contact us with questions, suggestions, or even to share your own story.
And if you love the show and want to support future episodes, you'll also find the link to our Patreon page where we share our extra bonus content.
Or if you can't support us financially, it'd be great if you could leave us a 5-star review at iTunes, Stitcher, or whatever podcast service you use to listen to us. And be sure to tell all your friends.
Until next time.